thank you very much for the warm welcome and the introductory friendly words, dear Claudio. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very impressed by and inspired by the historic site of this venue. It is an honor to be speaking in front of this distinguished audience in this unique, beautiful city on a topic which is very dear to me. I'm a founding member of Digipol, Germany's public affairs association. Like your organization, it is an important forum to discuss where we are standing as a branch and what the direction of our future engagement could look like. One interesting perspective could in fact be the concept of corporate political responsibility. When I first coined the term CPR and developed the initial concept about 9 years ago, the reactions read from reluctant interest to outright complete rejection. Things look much more positive now. Today's conference is a good indication. And CPR is taking root also in Denmark, in Austria, in Germany, and other regions of Europe, for example, in the curricula of business schools. Interestingly, it has also become a transatlantic topic. The State University of Michigan, for example, has only 2 years ago founded an institute with the name CPR Task Force. In October, I will join one of their professors at a panel in Atlanta, organized by the US Chamber of Commerce, and there we will contrast the US with the European interpretation of CPR. Let me start by starting with saying that for many years, multinational corporations and large medium-sized companies have worked almost across the board with CSR, corporate social responsibility concept, to frame their corporate responsibility activities. My thesis is that it falls short. As I will argue today, we need corporate political responsibility because it has the advantage of focusing on the most important precondition for economic activity and success, the political and institutional state of society, the democratic foundation, so to speak. CPR offers a strategic and comprehensive concept for companies to position themselves in the public realm. There are plenty of opportunities to seize at the interface between politics and business. Companies should think of investment not only in economic but also in political terms, beyond money channeled into research and development, personnel or machines. I believe that, to a large extent, business success depends on political conditions which until now have not received enough support from economic actors. Examples include resilient healthcare systems, high-quality education, modern infrastructure, and the rule of law. All societal actors, including business, profit from and should therefore invest in such collective goods. As CPR highlights the political and not just the social and ecological framework in which business operates, it can be seen as the strategic evolution of CSR. In the end, CPR is about business strengthening the democratic state for mutual benefit. The first step for companies is to develop political self-awareness. On a basic level, companies already are political actors, namely as employers, taxpayers, innovators, or lobbyists who heavily influence the legislative process. On top of that, companies have specific resources to their disposal: communicative, technological, organizational, and financial, which they can bring to bear in the public realm to stabilize the political system and in which they operate. To this end, they should systematically develop and manage their political brand. In so doing, companies need to respect the primacy of politics. Very important. The democratic mandate rests with elected officials. But in a pluralist society, businesses can and should advocate for their interests. Seems to be very natural for you because I know many of you are in this business. But often this remains confined to narrow lobbyism. CPR shows how companies, for their own profit, can broaden the scope of their political engagement to strengthen the public infrastructure. In fact, all sectors of society, media, science, culture, NGOs, foundations, religious groups, or civil society actors can contribute to upholding that infrastructure. Politics is more than party politics. It belongs in the center of society. Let's think about some threats to our democracy, democratic stability, populist resentment, semi-authoritarian governments, the spread of misinformation. These are just a few phenomena that put our democracies to the test. Now, it could be argued that business interests are not immediately related to such seemingly abstract developments. While this is true to a certain extent, it lacks strategic foresight. Many still overestimate what political institutions are able to endure. At the latest, since the images of the assault on the US Capitol went around the world, we should be aware of the urgency of the topic. In Europe as well, political establishments and democratic institutions are being challenged. That means the relative stability of most European countries cannot be taken for granted. We can only speculate how globalization, migration, environmental destruction, and many other trends will affect our lives. As election results in Western democracies show, citizens are less and less confident about the ability of established political parties and the state to solve pressing problems. I'm certain that businesses cannot afford to stand aloof in this phase of this challenge. CPR is therefore not a superficial or a soft topic. It is a hard topic because it asks the question of how to secure the political institutional conditions of one's economic existence. I think we need to work with a thorough democratic threat assessment. Two trends underline the relevance of CPR. The first is that consumers expect more from companies. In particular, the so-called millennials are asking about purpose, the meaningfulness of doing business, but also the population as a whole demands engagement. The Edelman Trust Barometer diagnoses year after year the perception of a comprehensive leadership crisis. At the same time, the greatest hopes are placed in business, while 60% trust in companies exceeds that in NGOs, governments, and the media. Among the mentioned, business was the only one seen both as ethical and competent. The German newspaper Handelsblatt summarized this study as follows: people hardly trust their governments anymore. The economy is supposed to fill the vacuum. There is thus a case for socio-political engagement of companies. But, and I really emphasize, but, business should not be played off against politics. It cannot be in the interest of business that international political elites lose acceptance and that trust in democracy institutions or democratic institutions erodes. This makes it all the more important to recognize the interdependence between the two spheres and that business has a strong interest in strengthening politics. The second trend is due to globalization and digitalization. How can political systems, which are shaped by borders, withstand forces that dissolve borders? Due to this discrepancy, a governance gap has opened up. There's a tension that cannot be easily resolved. On the one hand, many large companies especially big tech, are among the drivers of globalization and technological advances, and therefore challenge the state's capacity to act. On the other hand, businesses are needed as part of the solution. They have an important role to play in the regaining of control and governance skills. This is not a social, but a political task. The challenges of globalization no longer allow leaders to remain apolitical. A huge potential is left unused. In other words, the lack of a political stance is the blind spot of business. Entrepreneurs may wonder, what is the business case of CPR? Why should we undertake intensive efforts to achieve political sustainability, as I call it? The benefits are not necessarily visible in the short term, but let's be reminded, all sustainability-related arguments take the long view. The discourse around global warming is a case in point. Businesses have accepted their role in transforming our societies ecologically. Now, when it comes to political liberty, the same engagement is needed. Business can't take democracy for granted, as Harvard professor Rebecca Henderson states. But you may ask, isn't there a free rider problem? After all, why should individual companies try to strengthen democracy and provide public goods if competitors profit from them too? This is where political branding comes into play. If companies actively position themselves in the public sphere, they will sharpen their profile and increase their reputation among key stakeholders such as customers, employees, or business partners. Especially first movers will differentiate themselves from the market and gain comparative advantage. From a brand management perspective, specific CPR measures can even be beneficial in the short term. For instance, if a company receives public praise for a campaign that advocates for socio-political cause. An example here is Nike's cooperation with the American football player Colin Kaepernick, who, as you probably remember, protested racial injustice by kneeling during the national anthem of NFL games. Emphasis, however, rests on the long-term business case, as does prudent brand management. Even proponents of the shareholder value theory should understand that assuming political responsibility can boost the market value of a company. Businesses which have acquired an excellent brand reputation by consistently strengthening the public sphere build up capital that, in an event of misconduct, can mitigate a fall in the share price and help to initiate a turnaround. In the future, leaders will increasingly need to find answers to the issue of the common good. Making profit as such is not a sufficient reason for a company to exist. They should bear in mind that their stakeholders are always citizens too. For companies that practice CPR, it is easier to build trust. The brand can realize its potential for identification. But at the same time, it is important to endure controversy. Otherwise, we cannot talk about a stance. Another increasingly important business case for CPR is that it helps to attract the best personnel. It is a recruitment tool, if you want. I myself was surprised to see that I eventually employed 3 people who approached me because they had read my book. All students of economics and business aim to be great strategists. However, if it is true that business is increasingly influenced by politics, largely due to climate change and the systemic rivalry with China, the CEO of the future needs to be able to think and act politically. Politics and geopolitics is probably the most strategic aspect of future leadership. I'm sure that this will have an impact on future curricula in business school. The first premise on the road to CPR is therefore that companies understand its added value and want to act accordingly. They need to take a stance, and they need to take it seriously as an effort that requires significant leadership attention. Once this insight has been internalized, CPR can be operationalized through political branding. This takes place in two steps: brand creation and brand management. Both themes are well known in the business world. So far, however, they have had a rather narrow business focus. The first step, political brand creation, begins with taking stock. This provides an overview of the political dimension of the entire corporate brand. In other words, are there loose ends? Political loose ends that can be woven together, and what specific resources are available to the company. Then comes the strategic task of bringing the different elements and strength together to create a coherent political brand, for example, by employing a strength filter method with specific criteria and test stages. Of course, the political brand must be in harmony with the overall brand. For a brand to be strong, three basic criteria have to be fulfilled. First, it has to be true to itself. It has to correspond with realities. Second, it needs to differentiate itself from the competition, what you know as USP. Third, it should be relevant for the target group. Sounds like a no-brainer, but it's very difficult to achieve. CPR introduces a fourth criteria, the socio-political added value, in order to create the political brand mission statement. The second step, political brand management, aims at the systemic development of a brand over time so that it represents trustworthiness, triggers desires, and promotes loyalty. Here, concrete activities and formats need to be designed which fill the political brand with life. Corporate leaders have a whole range of options and resources at their disposal to manage the political brand. CPR measures can be rolled out in at least 4 fields of action, which you will also find in the book on CPR, which has been distributed here today. First, responsible lobbying, which emphasizes transparency and orientation towards the common good. Second, positioning via topics and dialogues. Companies should discuss and comment on business-critical political opportunities and risks. In Germany, for example, the CEOs of 11 big companies participated in an institution called We for Europe, in which they directly explained to their personnel how important the European Union is to their business. I think that's a perfect example for corporate political responsibility. Third, political participation projects that can strengthen democracy, for example, by supporting educational work, civil initiatives, investigative journalism, and campaigns to participate in campaigns. Campaigns to participate in elections, of course. Fourth, provision of public goods to strengthen the governance structures of society, investments and legal security, infrastructure or education. For example, in company kindergartens, libraries, sport facilities or civic initiatives. Then there are basic CPR measures all companies can engage in. For this, we have to keep in mind that companies are an important institution of social learning. Businesses are one of the last remaining places where people constantly interact with each other, comparable maybe only with sports clubs. Employees differ in terms of age, milieu, faith, as well as ethnic and social background. This is so important. No question that companies have a specific and special formative influence on social interaction. Here, identities are formed and forward-looking issues are kind of negotiated. CPR can make a contribution to bringing companies back toward the community and encouraging participation in political education. Let me end by talking a little bit about so-called low-hanging fruits of CPR engagement to revitalize the public realm. Almost all companies can engage in the following cross-cutting areas. First, cohesion and debating culture. There are concerns about the obvious fragmentation of the public sphere, a process that is being reinforced by social media. As a consequence, the social debate may also be fragmenting. The ability to speak with each other in civility, to disagree in civility, is getting lost. Conspiracy theories are flourishing that damage, of course, social cohesion and ultimately democracy. A functioning public sphere, however, is the prerequisite for a functioning democracy. Interestingly, we have the first alliance of more than 80 top companies in Germany that are providing coaching on a voluntary basis to their employees. It is called BC4D, Business Council for Democracy. Second, political education, coaching on how does our democracy function. This is a cross-cutting sectoral issue which may offer the greatest leverage. I'm certain that the greater the number of citizens who support democracy and its institutions deliberately and with conviction, the greater the chance of effectively countering dangers such as political extremism. It is advisable to link CPR measures to in-company training and employee qualification. Finally, leadership by CEO activism. CEOs, in particular, can take a public position. This is so-called CEO activism, and it has a strong record in the US and less so in Europe. But delegating all political issues to interest groups is a missed opportunity to show an authentic voice from business. Of course, in a changed social climate, leaders will need moderation skills and well-considered, credible selection of political engagements. And it is crucial, of course, that the risk of such engagement will be to avoid large-scale disappointment among citizens, employees, customers. Certain controversies, however, will have to be accepted if one takes a clear stance. One of my clients, Starbucks, they have initiated 2 or 3 years ago a campaign against racism in the United States, and they knew they would have trouble in the southern states of the United States. But they still did it. They took the risk. So that means to take a stand. It would be interesting for me to learn a bit from you how you see the debate on CEO activism emerge in Italy. Is it picking up? In Germany, CEOs are still reluctant to position themselves politically in the public realm. Former Siemens CEO Joe Kaeser was an exception. He explained, for example, in detail in 2018 why he cancelled his participation in an investor conference in Riyadh after the Saudi Arabian journalist Khashoggi had been murdered. According to his own statement, he weighed the importance of shareholder interests, Siemens' reputation, the relationship with customers in the Arab world, the prospect of billion-dollar contracts, and the security of thousands of jobs. His message was ambivalent. For this, he received public pressure and criticism, but I would like to give him credit for that he had the courage to enter the political arena. He openly addressed the dilemma he found himself in. Despite Kaeser's back and forth, it is a positive signal that CEOs enhance the profile of the brand by practicing a political stance. Here's the guideline for political intervention that may be helpful. Companies should be non-partisan about specific issues, but take sides if our liberal democracy is at stake. It is therefore advisable not to become too involved in too much detail in political statements and demands, particularly when it comes to party politics. But I'm sure that very few leaders would be so stupid to do that. But a CEO intervention could include issues of geopolitics and trades. A business leader could, for example, make a clear statement that Russia is the aggressor in the war in Ukraine. Rightly understood, CPR can be seen as a socio-political vision. Imagine a society in which all societal actors ask themselves systematically what they can contribute to the strengthening of democracy. Citizens and corporate citizens alike would not see the state as an enemy which can be selfishly exploited, but rather the guarantor of freedom, justice, security, economic liberty, and welfare. How much stronger and resilient would our Western societies be, particularly in face of a systemic confrontation with more authoritarian regimes? We in the public affairs business understand how the public sphere functions, how it works. And we know that how vulnerable everything is. So let's make a contribution and work together towards a new dimension of sustainability, the political. You don't have to call it CPR, but the direction should be clear. To sum up, companies should invest with respect in the societal and political foundations of their economic success and activities. Ultimately, that means to strengthen the democratic state. Thank you very much for the invitation and your attention. Thank you.